Hello everybody, I'm here in Rio de Janeiro at MSI 2017 with G2 Esports, and I wanted to talk about why TSM lost and why EU North America didn't look too good going into this tournament compared to the Chinese team and the Korean team. Okay, so a couple things that are really important for in my opinion, to address about like EU, North America, international competition, etc., and mostly like why it is that TSM lost, because everybody's been asking me, what do you think? Why did TSM lose? Blah 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 blah. So there's two major reasons that I see. Number one, simple player pool. So essentially, what happens is you have a bell curve, right? A normal distribution of skill in every single region, and Korea and Europe just have much larger populations of players compared to North America. And so what happens is the lower level non-imported players of all of the teams essentially are just lower in the United States, which means that, or in NA. So essentially, because competition in League of Legends is an ecosystem approach, because you can only get as good as the teams that you train against, what happens is when the worst teams are worse and the medium teams are worse, then the top teams are worse, because the training partner effect, where essentially all of our training is done with a partner, therefore the ecosystem suffers when there's just not as much of a big talent pool to draw on. Okay, so that's just like a simple mathematics as to why there's a struggle in NA to bring the kind of like performance that just might be a lot easier for other regions, because they simply have much better, not much better, but they simply have deceptively better training because the ecosystem is stronger. Okay, so number two reason that North America lost, the TSM lost, was because I think that North America and not as much Europe, but North America for sure, suffers from a problem of having direction within a team. So essentially, I believe the direction in a team comes from either the coaching staff having a strong coaching philosophy of this is what League of Legends is, this is how to play the game, and this is how it should be played and trained, or a key defining player on the roster who is not only on the roster and like good and skilled, right, but also a leader and not a theory crafter, okay, but a visionist, somebody who has a vision, right? Somebody who has a way that they see the game and that they can rally people behind as a mission. Okay, that's very different from having like a strong player or a strong personality or something like that. So those are very different things. So the difference is example Hai and Dardoch. Okay, so you have Hai on C9, clearly a leader who rallies people behind a certain vision of how to play the game. Another good example of this would be Afromu, right? And then Dardoch, let's say like he's a really, really strong player, right? And he gives a certain style to a team, but he doesn't lead them in that or make it their mission or like understand how to put that together yet in a kind of like crusade. So teams, in order to succeed on a global level, need that kind of vision in order to succeed. And essentially, I'll give an example of why I think that we had that in 2016 with TSM, and then I'm not really sure if they do anymore. I think that they do, but why it's still a struggle, even if it exists. So Parth and I and the coaching staff TSM and the players like all collaborated in 2016 in the summer split to try to create a vision for how the game should be, and to push that and to storytell it and to make it a narrative and to train on that. And it worked really well. And then we got to the World's Boot Camp, and we couldn't bring key parts of our training staff with us because of space problems or space limitations. And at the same time, we were running into challenges to our belief system of what is the ultimately the League of Legends and how it should be played. You know, in the form of stronger opponents who were punishing things that you know we were struggling to adapt with. And so I think that by the time that group stages started, and we had started to see then the tournament meta and how it was adapting, and certainly by the second week, you know, we had a clear vision again of you know, this is how we believe in TSM that the game should be played, but then of course our training had been off kilter for a lot of that, and we were really challenged to try to catch up in terms of our champion pools and our macro movements, which, by the way, is one of the reasons that since that moment, I've always thought it's much better to commit yourself to kind of like universal philosophical macro principles as a way of training than incredible coordination that is based on specific comps, because those can change at the drop of a hat in the middle of a tournament. If you guess the wrong one before going in, then you could be really kind of like out to dry before you even play your first match. So I'll give you an example of one at MSI, for example, GAM, Gigabyte Marines. They have a really clear-cut kind of vision of what League of Legends is, and it was able to carry them to some moderate success, especially compared to how much people thought they were going to succeed at this tournament. And of course, the problem being that, like, if you all in on a gambit like that, it's punishable, right? It can be punishable because it could be not the perfect way to play the game, even though it gives you drive and direction and training. At the end, it might fail to a better or a more perfect way of playing. All right, so that's essentially like a lot of my take on why it is that NA has suffered historically in League of Legends. Number one, player base. Number two, there's not a lot of visionary coaches or visionary players who really drive rosters, and I think that is obviously something that really only exists in Korea in terms of the coaching infrastructure, because they were around since since Brood War, since StarCraft 1, but certainly since Brood War and on into StarCraft 2. And essentially, the idea being that League of Legends in Korea did not start from scratch with 5 players, on a roster. It started with like sister teams and 10-man organizations with farm teams and full manager, coach, kind of like head coach, sub-coach kind of infrastructure stuff. So what you see is that they really are able to kind of get these strong narratives of how to play the game and iterate on them and have a very strong ecosystem that they're able to test against and jump ahead much faster than the rest of the world. Now, why does Europe historically have better performance than North America? Because, again, the player talent thing. And also, North America, I believe, gave away power a lot earlier than Europe in terms of its professionalization. So let's say you have a roster of 5 people, and you're like, okay, well, we want to, one team says, okay, we're going to hire a manager. Okay, so all the other teams then hire managers, and they say, you take care of these things that we used to take care of for the sake of performance, so that we can focus on the game, on something else, and you take care of that, and we'll pay you. Okay, you're giving away a little bit of power as a player when you do that. Then Riot comes along, and they say, okay, now you're going to have coaches. Okay, so they hire coaches. They give away a little bit more power, and they say, okay, you take care of these things that we used to take care of, and we'll have higher performance as a result. We can focus more on our performance. And then you give away the power to orgs who say, okay, you're going to take care of housing and food and monetization and structure and rosters and talent searching and all this stuff, and we give away more power for the sake of performance, right? So performance keeps increasing as you keep distributing like this, kind of like NASCAR, Formula 1. When you stop at a pit stop, the driver doesn't get out and change the tires. And maintenance the car, there's a mechanic, and there's a whole bunch of people. There's like one person for each tire, right? So this is the sort of principle of the growth of a pro sport that's turning into an entertainment sport, or in this case, the performance is increasing. However, in Europe, that was delayed because players a lot more kind of like held that to themselves. There was not as much immediate professionalization. So an interesting thing happened because there were so many, star players in Europe. They developed really key kind of like approaches to the game that I think were very unique and strong and interesting, and were able to carry them farther in more of these international tournaments prior to, like early on before Korea was as incredibly dominant as they were in 2015 and before. And if you look at North America, the problem with this approach of professionalization is that, simply put, there's not enough talent in the coaching area yet in order to drive the performance increase that should happen when you give away your power to a coach. I think there are very few coaches in the West, outside of a few outliers, that can kind of like drive the philosophical direction of a team in a way that gives that is visionary and that gives a way to play the game that is strong enough to succeed. And that is why you're starting to see more and more teams realizing this and kind of importing coaches also from other regions outside of North America. The first, of course, with, I don't know if it's the first, but Reaper being one of the more recent, significant ones, and now Immortals bringing in Song. And I think that this is a kind of an easy way to understand what this performance difference looks like. And with that information, you can then predict essentially what's going to happen and when the performance gap is going to close. And it has a lot to do with professionalization of the coaching role, understanding of the game in terms of a system, and then the ability to structure training in a way that catches up with regions that have larger player pools, which might not even happen. I mean, it's just the case that China and the US do much better at the Olympics because they just have larger populations. Now, Finland, for example, one of the smallest countries in the world, can compete a lot of times in medals in certain events because of specialization, but they certainly aren't going to, account for like a medal haul of the same magnitude of the United States and China. And so that's something that North America might just have to suffer with until more people in North America play League of Legends compared to Europe and Korea. But I also think that it's possible to work around if you have strong enough training partners in the professional level. If you have strong enough teams that are very good and good enough to challenge you and push your whole kind of region up, then you can start to get these kind of training effects. And that's why I'm so optimistic about NextPlat EU, because I think that all the other teams realized that they cannot kick G2 off of their throne by just training around in G2. And they also realize that, they're part of the reason that the region is not be able to be as strong historically, because they're simply just like, it's too easy to beat them, and it's just not enough of a challenge to form the kind of insane precision that is needed on the international level to compete with other squads. So now you see teams like UOL who go away to a boot camp, and whether or not they get takeaways in terms of knowledge from Korea, or just the fact that they are boot camping and really intentionally diving into the game, and they have a really clear-cut play style. And Splice is trying to shake up their coaching roster. Teams are really taking action to try to solve this crisis of providing challenge and competition in the EU ecosystem. So I'm really optimistic about that, and I think that it's going to happen in North America too. I think Immortals isn't satisfied with being a one-hit wonder in terms of their really good splits, and they actually want to produce results for that. I think C9 is not trying to rest too much on its laurels, and they really want to get not only a split victory, but also a showing internationally. And I hope that things progress, because it'd be a lot of fun to watch. And another thing I wanted to discuss and tackle here is the idea, the narrative surrounding Trick at this MSI. So I want to remind everybody that there was a lot of narratives around Expect about how, he's bad at this and bad at this and blah, 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 and worst player. And then all of a sudden, one little Twitter video comes out showing his calibration with the team, and everybody's like, best player ever. Okay, so people are doing the same thing with Trick right now, and it's really infuriating to see that, for example, in the TSM drafts, everybody's blaming the coaching staff and the org and blah, 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 and being like, the draft, and nobody's batting an eye at the players in terms of the draft. And then when people look at G2 and they look at the Nunu pick, they're like, it's all Trick. They're all blaming him on the Nunu pick instead of the coaching staff for putting him on a tier 3 jungler, right? So I really want a lot of that blame to be directed at us and away from him, because in my mind, and it should be in your mind as well, he's the stellar, performing sacrificial star who was able to, at a moment's notice, just step up and play a random tier 3 jungler in an international tournament and actually win on it 2-for-1. And that's not something that you can ask a sub-tier talented player to pull off, okay? So first of all, there's that. Like, switch around the understanding of what was happening with the Nunu and take all of that off of Yoon or Trick. And number two, like, I just don't understand how people cannot perceive the jungle role, you know, in terms of like the team's success and failure in the laning phase as more integral. I mean, if you're playing jungle with a very perfect kind of style, then there's just things that, I mean, so like let's take Svenskeren for example. People rail on him for having lanes that are pushing against him and yet going and making an aggressive move. And yet when Trick doesn't then take the risk of going and suiciding the enemy jungle because his lanes are getting pushed in and you know, his, or you know, feeding or whatever, and like they're just tanking it, and so he doesn't actually go make the aggressive move that would result in his death. People are frustrated with that because they say, oh, he's not aggressive enough, blah blah blah. So I think that people really need to take a step back from this weird narrative they have from the numbers surrounding Trick's performance at this MSI and understand a couple things. One, that you can't associate him with Nunu and Nunu's status as a tier 3 jungler and like the picks that related to that, okay? Because it's just not true. And secondly, I think it's really hypocritical to like attack a jungler like Svenskeren for misplaying aggressively when his lanes are getting punished, and then attack a jungler like Trick for playing appropriately when his lanes are getting punished and not going and inting it in the enemy team's jungle. So really just like take a step back from that whole narrative and look at specific examples of things you don't like and bring those up rather than just parroting the status quo or the circle jerk around this player. I would appreciate that. Okay, I think that's all for this vlog, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And please cheer us on for the next few days. Ciao.